Our next cadence doesn't fit into either authentic cadence or half cadence, and you'll see why in a second. This is called the deceptive cadence, and it's a cadence that starts out sounding like it's going to be an authentic cadence, but the 5 chord ends up moving to a 6 instead of to 1. So here are a couple examples. Here's a normal cadence in the key of B flat. 1 to 2 6 to 5 to 1. But if we end it with a deceptive cadence, it becomes so it's a surprise right at the end, or a deception. Interestingly, these two progressions have the same soprano line, but in the second one, that B flat is part of a G minor chord, or a 6 chord. This can also happen in minor. Let's listen to the same kind of progression in C minor. The standard 1, 2 diminished 6 to 5 to 1. Put a deceptive cadence on the end and it becomes and that's a nice one. It's really beautiful how it moves from a minor progression to a surprise ending on a major chord. Notice that in the major form of the progression, we start on 1 and end on a minor 6. In the minor form of the progression, we start with a minor 1 and end on a major 6. And this bracketed part of each progression is called the deceptive progression, or happening here at the end of a little phrase, a deceptive cadence, 5 to 6. Let's move on to how we do the voice leading in the deceptive cadence. There's only one trick that you need to know, that you should double the third in the chord that you arrive on. Either this 6, if the music is in a major key, you arrive on minor 6, or this 6, if the music is in a minor key, you'll arrive on a major 6. And by doubling the third in that arrival chord, you'll avoid voice leading problems like an augmented second in one of the voices or parallel fifths. Here's how it works. Let's harmonize 5 to 6 in C major. We've got the 5 chord already harmonized. Bass, tenor, alto, soprano. And they're going to move up to a 6 chord like that. And the traditional way to do this is to double the third. That means we're going to need to have 2 C's in this chord. Since the root of the chord is A, the third of the chord is C. We've got one already, and the most convenient place to get a second C would be to move the D down to a middle C in the tenor, like this. And then to complete the chord, we have A, C, and C. We also need an E in the 6th chord, so we'll let the alto come down and supply the E that makes this a complete chord. So that progression sounds like this. Now, I mentioned that doubling the third, that is this C and that C, avoids voice leading problems. You can see what would happen if instead of putting a C there, we decided to write a complete chord and use the same doubling we did in the 5 chord. That is, let's move the D up to an E and the G up to an A. This is always a danger when we have bass moving by step. Now you can see that we've caused parallel fifths between the bass and the tenor, parallel octaves between the bass and the alto. And these problems can be avoided if we just start out by saying, all right, we're going to double the third and do what we did. Bring the D down to the C, thus doubling the third, and then let the G come down to an E to complete the chord. So that's the traditional way to do it. Voice leading problems all disappear. In C minor, here's a similar situation. We've got G in the bass, B in the tenor, G and and D in alto and soprano, and we want to resolve from 5 to 6 there. So let's start out by trying to make sure we double the third, and the third again is C over the A flat, so we need to move one of the inner voices to C. The easiest one is going to be the B, so we'll do that. The leading tone B resolve up to C, and the alto is going to skip down to E flat. That's a very typical move for the alto voice. One of the inner voices is usually skipping down in this progression. So we end up with this sound. Like that. So we have the 5 chord moving to the 6 chord with a doubled third. Let's see what happens if we try to use a different voice leading. Minor is particularly treacherous. The obvious one is if we move the alto up to an A flat instead of down to an E flat, we would get parallel octaves with the bass. You can see that right there. And the one that's a little harder to see is if we have the B natural, instead of going up to the C, where it doubled the third, let it go down to the A flat. At first glance that may look okay, but then when we think about the accidentals, B natural to A flat is an augmented second, and we can't have that. If you do this on your paper, I'm going to write A2 like that. So knowing to simply double the third relieves both of those problems. I'll put it back the way we had it. The augmented second goes away when we bring the tenor up, resolving the leading tone. And to complete the chord, we get rid of the parallel octaves by having the alto come down here like this. So if we simply double the third in 6, then we won't have that problem. And let me add another way to say the same thing. This often amounts to the same thing. Resolve the leading tone in inner voice. So in most progressions, we don't have to worry about resolving the leading tone in an inner voice. We're allowed to frustrate it. But you see here in this one, leading tone in the inner voice, frustrating it, moved it down to A flat, causing an augmented interval. So in your setting of 5 to 6, the deceptive cadence, you should always resolve the leading tone even if it's in an inner voice, and that will result in doubling the third most of the time in 6. If it doesn't, make that happen by also moving another voice to the third. The last comment I want to make about the deceptive progression is on some assignments you'll just be having to recognize it where it happens, and the way you can always tell that we have the deceptive progression or deceptive cadence is the bass note moving from 5 to 6, either in minor or 5 to 6 in major. If you see and hear that happening at a cadence point, you'll know you have a deceptive cadence. Our last cadence type is called the Phrygian half cadence, and this cadence is a special approach to 5. We know that all half cadences are approaches to 5 that land on 5 or some other dominant chord. But the Phrygian half cadence happens only in minor, and the particular progression is 4/6 going to 5. It has a really distinctive sound. Let's go to an example from your course pack. This is on page 53. And here's a little bit of music by Brahms. I'll start playing here in measure 3 since it's just a repeat of the previous 2. And that'll take us to the Phrygian cadence that happens here in the last 3 chords. It's one of those cadences that once you hear it and know what it is, you never forget it because it's kind of medieval sounding. The last three chords again. So isn't that kind of dramatic sounding, and it has a medieval feel to it. So what we were just learning on the previous page is what those chords are, and you'll have to fill this in on assignment sometime to be able to recognize this, but the second to last chord is always going to be a 4-6, and it goes to a 5 like that. In this case, the progression is 1 to 4-6 to 5, a Phrygian cadence right here. That's the Phrygian cadence. So, how to write the Phrygian cadence. Things to observe and things that we write in. In 4-6 going to 5, the bass is always going to descend by half step, just like in the Brahms we just listened to. 4-6, bass note moves down a half step to get to 5. A good soprano line in the Phrygian cadence is scale degree 4 going to scale degree 5. And a good doubling is to double the third above the bass in the 4-6 chord. That's not required, and it's not even as strong a rule as we have in the deceptive cadence, but it works really well, and I recommend that you use it. Double the third above the bass. That's not the third of the chord, it's the third above the bass in the 4-6 chord. So let's try this out. Here's a little progression in D minor, 1 to 4-6 to 5. Do, lay, sol, and we see here that half step motion from the lay, lowered 6 down to 5. And we'll start by writing in a good soprano using 4 to 5 in the upper voices. So in the key of D minor, 4 to 5 is going to be G to A. So G, A, like that. To complete our soprano, why not, let's put a scale degree 3 for this note. Now we have 3, 4, 5, which is common and works really well, leading to the Phrygian half cadence. So our outer voices now go like that. All right, what else do we have in our recipe here? Good doubling, third above the bass in the 4-6 chord. Okay, so the bass is B flat in the 4-6 chord, and a third above that would be D. So it's kind of low for tenor, but let's just follow the recipe. We'll put a D there, and we'll double that by putting a D also in the alto. And let's complete our lines. The 1 chord, we have a D and an F, so we'll need an A, and we get to pick our own doubling, and this will use a usual doubling, like double the root. So now we have D, A, D, F, the doubled third in this chord, and we'll just move in a convenient way to the 5 chord. We have 2 A's. We need a leading tone, which is C sharp. So to keep our voices from getting too far apart, let's move the alto down to the C sharp, and to complete the chord, let's move this D up to an E. We could do it the other way, but then we'd have an E up here and a C sharp down there, and the alto and tenor would be more than an octave apart. So this is the better way to do it. Let's do another example. We'll move to the key of A minor, and our bass line and chords go 1 chord to a minor 5-6. We haven't used minor 5 very much in this course, but it does happen, especially if you have a descending bass line like this. You'll hear how good this sounds in a second. So we have do, te, lay, sol, 1, 5-6, 4-6, and then to the major 5 for the arrival of that Phrygian half cadence. Do, te, lay, sol. Use the same recipe here for a soprano. We're gonna end with 4 to 5 as we have these two chords. And let's see, in the key of A minor, 4 is D, and 5 is going to be E. So we've got that. And to finish our soprano, let's say we start on a middle C in the 1 chord. We certainly don't want to go down any lower than that with our soprano line. So as the 1 chord moves to the 5/6 chord, let's move up to the nearest tone we can. There's no D in a 5/6 chord, but there is an E. The 5/6 chord is the minor 5 chord, that's E, G natural, and B. And so we picked the nearest chord tone there. It's a 5/6 chord because the third of the chord, G natural, is in the bass. And so now our outer voices go like that. That's nice and strong. No voice leading problems or parallels. Now we just want to fill in our voice leading. So let's double the third in our 4/6 chord. That takes the tenors very low. This is really probably a little bit too low for tenors. Some can sing down there, but we'll allow it just to do this demonstration here. So the third above the bass in the 4/6 is in the tenor. It's also in the alto. And this will sound fine in piano. And now let's compose our alto voice. Maybe we'll start the alto on A, 5/6, go up to a B, and then the A, and bring that down to a G sharp to supply the leading tone in our 5 chord. Tenor voice, let's see, we have A, and C, so we need an E here. E can stay on E because that's the root of the 5/6 chord. Then the 4/6 chord is D, F, A, and let's resolve the A up as 4/6 goes to 5. We'll move it up to B. Sounds good. An unforgettable cadence sound.